Wherever you look, across the continents and across the centuries, there are fiddles. Rather like the extended family tree of some medieval monarch, the genealogy of the fiddle is long, rambling and often bitterly disputed, an ancestry littered with foreign potentates, pretenders, wicked uncles and princes in the tower. And here in the 21st century, with the modern violin apparently the master of all its surveys, have all the weird, three-stringed, upside-down, crooked fiddles of the bygone age ended up in the cabinets of some vast, dusty museum? Far from it. This video is a celebration of the diversity of the world of fiddles, some bearing little resemblance to the violin, and often steeped in history, myth and mysticism. We'll leave aside the old question of what's the difference between a fiddle and a violin, and jump straight to the ethnomusicologist's definition of a fiddle, which is any bowed-stringed instrument. It was the bow which was the key invention. The ability to stretch a string across a resonating chamber, be it a gourd, a coconut or a hollowed-out piece of wood, made plucked instruments commonplace across the world for millennia before the invention of the bow and the first fiddles, but it was the bow that changed everything. The earliest contender for the fiddle's ancestor must be the Ravanastron, a rather mysterious stringed instrument, for which the bow is said to have been invented by King Ravan of Ceylon before 3000 BC. The significance of the claim is that this was the first recorded use of the bow on a stringed instrument. It's a long, thin instrument with two gazelle-gut strings stretched over a wooden body. It's still used today by Buddhist monks. It seems likely that while the name of the instrument may indeed date back thousands of years, its use with a bow probably did not. It's rather like suggesting that King Ravan invented the wheel, or sliced bread, or Guinness, but it just didn't catch on except among the local monks. The Ravanastron's claim is further weakened by the fact that all available illustrations seem to show an instrument identical to the Chinese Erhu. It is probably a publisher's mistake, perhaps made many decades ago and faithfully copied ever since. A more widely accepted view of the bow's origin is that it was invented by the horse-riding warrior nomads of Central Asia in the 8th century or shortly before. They would certainly have had ready access to horsehair, the military bow was in constant use, and rosin was essential for maintaining the strings of these bows. The Chinese certainly credit the barbarians on their western borders for the origin of the Huquin group of bowed instruments. The bow rapidly spread in the 10th century along the Silk Road and through the Islamic countries of North Africa and the Near East. The reason why the bow spread so quickly is clear. As we've already said, there were already a myriad plucked stringed instruments in use, variations on the lyre, the harp, the lute and the zither. What the bow added was sustain and a big step in the direction of the human voice. How could a single plucked note compete against an instrument that could virtually sing? Every musician who heard a bowed fiddle used it for the first time must have immediately wanted to try it out on his own instrument and look at ways to modify the instrument in order to make the best use of the bow. There are three main branches in the development of fiddles around the world, but for a clue as to what the first fiddles may have looked like, Central Asia seems like the obvious place to start. Mongolia has as its national instrument the Morin Khur, also known as the horsehead fiddle. It is full of magic and symbolism, representing the nomad's love of his horse and his lifestyle amid the wide open spaces of Asia. A square box-like body is held upright between the knees, a little like a cello. The long neck has two strings. The thicker or male string is made from 130 hairs from a stallion's tail, while the thinner female string has 105 mare's tail hairs. I suspect that the offer of a set of Tomastic spirochore would be politely declined. Instead of a scroll, the neck is topped off with a carved horse's head, not unlike those found on the staffs of shaman, who were said to have the power to journey into the spirit world. The sound of the Morin Khur is rich, deep and highly expressive, and the music produced deliberately imitates galloping hooves, neighing horses, and the wind sighing through the grasses. Legend tells that the first Morin Khur was made by Kuku Namyul, a Mongolian shepherd, who received from the gods a gift of a magical horse to allow him to fly at night to visit his distant beloved. A jealous rival cut the wings off the horse, causing it to fall to earth and die. From the body, the distraught Kuku built the Morin Khur and used it to create tragic songs of loss and longing. From the design of his instrument, one suspects that he missed the horse more than the girl. China has an instrument closely related to the Morin Khur, the Erhu. It is one of the family of instruments called Huquin, meaning two-stringed barbarian instrument. Earliest records of the Erhu come from the 5th century Song dynasty, but this version was bowed with a strip of bamboo. The horsehair bow, which probably came in on the Silk Road, arrived around the 11th century. It's a rather more delicate instrument than the Morin Khur, with a small, usually 6-sided bowl-like body of wood and a belly of python skin. The 2 strings were originally of silk, but are now usually of steel. Both strings are fingered simultaneously with the back of the nail, with the angle and pressure of the bow determining which string is sounded. Unusually for such an instrument, the playing style is not based on drones and is capable of great delicacy and sensitivity. Also very unusual is that the hairs of the bow, instead of being placed on top of the strings, are in fact permanently fitted between the strings. India has one of the strangest looking fiddles in the Sarangi, with its squat, rectangular box-like body, 3 melody strings and up to 40 sympathetic strings which ring on their own, giving a resonant whining sound to the instrument. The name means 100 colours, giving some idea of the expressiveness of the instrument. Yehudi Menuhin described it as the very soul of Indian feeling and thought. It is widely found in the Hindustani area of North India, and it's said that the first one was built by a wandering doctor who woke from sleeping under a tree to be startled by the wind blowing over the skin of a dead monkey. The bow travelled west as well as east along the Silk Road. One of the first beneficiaries was the Islamic world of Persia and Arabia. The first fiddle to be developed there was the Rebab, a simple instrument with a small rounded body, often a gourd or coconut shell, and some kind of skin belly, a long stick neck and a peg box to which up to 3 strings could be attached. Such instruments circulated widely through the Middle East, Far East and North Africa. The body would often have a spike coming out of its lower end, hence the common generic name of spike fiddle. A slightly more sophisticated fiddle is the Kemence, developed in Persia. The name comes from kiman, meaning bow or violin, the words interestingly being interchangeable, and che, small. There are at least 6 different spellings of the Kemence in common use. The advantage of this instrument over the Rebab is that it has a proper fingerboard, so that the strings can be fingered with greater ease, accuracy and range. In Greece and Turkey, the Kemence has a confusing, promiscuous and incestuous relationship with the lyra. In some cases, the same instrument may share both names. The Turkish classic Kemence is referred to by the Greeks as the Politiki Lyra. There are 2 common body types. The first is the so-called boat shape, as represented by the Black Sea fiddle or Pontic Lyra. This is found mainly around the town of Trabzon, formerly settled by Greeks, but now in northeastern Turkey. The 3 strings are tuned in fourths and are usually double-stopped, giving it a distinctive and strangely archaic sound. Having a proper fingerboard, this is one of the easiest such instruments for a fumbling Western fiddle player to make sense of. If you've ever taken a holiday on the beautiful Greek island of Crete, you may have come across the Cretan Lyra, which has the second of the main body types, the pear shape. This is used for the accompaniment of dancing and singing. Like the rest of this family of instruments, it's played vertically and can be used either standing or sitting. It's a robust instrument with a powerful nasal tone. Most of the melody is played on the top string of 3, usually tuned G, D, A. Very similar to the Cretan Lyra is the Lijerica. This is a pear-shaped 3-string fiddle found in the mountainous and coastal areas of Dalmatia and Herzegovina. It bears a close resemblance to the lyra of Crete and is believed to have been introduced from Greece in the 18th century. It's still used for the accompaniment of dancing in the area around Dubrovnik and on some of the islands. It is played by the dance master, who sits in the centre of the circle of dancers. He plays with a Lijerica on his left knee, stamping his foot to give the rhythm and calling out instructions, often in rhyming verse, and often with a border innuendo. Another pear-shaped fiddle is the Bulgarian instrument called the Gadulka. Unlike the Cretan Lyra, it has no fingerboard, and the strings are stopped with the fingertips or backs of the fingernails, allowing for smooth sliding between notes, but making it extremely difficult for a violinist to master. The 3 melody strings are usually tuned A, E, A. There are also a number of sympathetic strings, between 10 and 12, which lie underneath the melody strings. These are not fingered, but ring on their own as the instrument is being played. They are tuned chromatically between A and D. There are 2 round or oval sound holes on either side of the bridge, called ochi, or eyes. The fiddle first arrived in Western Europe in the 10th or 11th century, when it was brought into Moorish Spain. The First Crusade, around 1100 AD, saw its first widespread introduction into northern Europe. Medieval Europe had two principal forms of fiddle, the Rebec and the Vielle. Both were usually played on the chest or upper arm rather than gamba style like a cello, or indeed the great majority of primitive fiddles. Northern Europeans seem to have used fiddles on the arm straight away, perhaps because the tradition was to play while standing rather than sitting. The Rebec is an instrument with a pear-shaped body or resonance box, a flat top or belly, and a narrow neck that curves seamlessly into the body. It has 3 or 6 strings, as opposed to the 2 or 4 on the Rebab, and the body was made of wood, whereas on the Rebab it was usually made from a gourd with a skin face. The strings were attached on the body to a bridge or end pin, and at the neck end were tuned by pegs. It has 2 sound holes, usually semicircular. The second and competing European fiddle was the Vielle. Unlike the Rebec, this had a distinct neck and a slightly arched belly connected by ribs. In the 12th century it superseded the Welsh lyre-like instrument, the crwth, also known as the crowd or rote, itself an adaptation of what was previously a plucked instrument. The number of strings on the Vielle grew from 1 to 5. They were of gut and were tuned G, C, C, G, E or C, G, C, G, C. It was said to be the most common stringed instrument at the time, being loud and with a good dynamic range. 2 examples of this medieval fiddle were found on the wreck of the Mary Rose. By 1500, the Viola de Braccio had developed. This was held against the shoulder, and it was from this that the violin developed. The violin in its more or less modern form emerged in Milan, in northern Italy, between 1520 and 1550. The violin was louder, brighter, easier to play and to tune, and when tuned in fifths, well able to deal with the harmonic advance of Western classical music. So was that the end of the story? As far as the top end of the market was concerned, yes. It's quite remarkable that, after so much change and development, that the violin has remained virtually the same for nearly 5 centuries. However, the world of the ballroom and concert hall was far removed from the tavern, the street corner, and the country fair, where fiddlers of every description continued to ply their trade on instruments strange, diverse, and wonderful. Take a long drive north to Scandinavia, and we come to a land of ice and snow, of mountains, forests, trolls, legends, and fiddles. The standard violin is in use throughout the region, but southwest Norway is the home to one of the most fascinating of fiddle variants, the Hardanger fiddle. Whilst this looks superficially like a violin and is played in the same position, there are many subtle differences. Most important is the presence of 4 or 5 sympathetic strings which lie underneath the fingerboard. The neck is slightly shorter, the body deeper, the bridge flatter, and the F-holes wider than normal. The body is elaborately decorated with black ink, and the fingerboard inlaid with mother of pearl, and the scroll carved into a lion or a dragon. One of the most fascinating aspects of the Hardanger fiddle is its many cross-tunings that are used, and the names which these are given. The most common is the high bass, AD-AE, followed by standard tuning, GD-AE. There are around 24 more tunings, many of which are named for colours of the sky, light blue, twilight grey, semi-grey, and so on. As with the ragas of India, where different scales are used at different times of the day, so in Norway the tunings may change as the evening progresses and the sky darkens. On winter nights when the stars are out, the fire is burnt down, the listeners have fallen asleep, and the beer has run out, the fiddler may switch to a half-troll tuning, or the infamous devil's tuning, AE, A, C sharp. The devil and his minions play leading roles in the many legends associated with Norwegian fiddling. With the instrument in devil's tuning, you can play Ramaslatter, hypnotic tunes with the power to send people into a trance. It is said that once playing such a tune, the fiddler may be unable to stop and the instrument has to be pulled off him. Sometimes the devil himself may appear at a dance, grab the fiddler's instrument and play with such power that the dancers will dance themselves to death. Their skeletons continue dancing until the skulls fall off and roll down the hill. Among the devil's earthly representatives are the sprites and trolls who live under bridges in mountain streams. If you want to gain supernatural fiddling abilities, there's one very easy way to do it. Forget YouTube videos, forget tutor books and Skype lessons. Instead, go to a bridge at midnight and hang your fiddle underneath. Then go home and try to get a good night's sleep. In the morning, go back to your fiddle. The troll will have retuned it, played one of his unearthly tunes and put all of his magic into your fiddle. He will also have hung his own instrument, identical in every way, next to yours. Pick your own fiddle and you have all the troll's magical musical ability. Pick the wrong one, and the devil has your soul forever. Even the Americas have some fascinating offshoots to the fiddle. The Apache Indians in the southwest have a bowed instrument that they call tsil edo atl, wood that sings. It has a body made from a hollow tube, traditionally made from the stalk of the agave plant. A diamond-shaped sound hole is cut into the tube. It's used more for rhythm than melody, and was probably copied from Spanish instruments introduced in the late 1500s. In the absence of carved wood, plant materials have often been used to make crude fiddles. Here, for example, is a Gourd fiddle, recently made in Jamaica. There are also many instances of 19th and early 20th century fiddlers in America, starting off on cornstalk fiddles, gourd fiddles, and even cigar box fiddles. The Huichol Indians of west central Mexico have a fiddle of white wood with 2 horsehair and 2 metal strings. This Raweali is used in magical rituals, and legend has it that it came to them direct from Santo Cristo, the Divine Christ, who won a fiddle contest using the instrument. Surely the only known case of the devil not having the best instrument and all the best tunes. Faced with the competition of the violin, some fiddles have completely died out. Shetland had its own fiddle, the mysterious Gu, now only represented by a handful of reconstructions based on scant evidence from a written description in 1809. Some instruments have been successfully brought back to life. Polish string specialist Maria Pomianowska has popularized 2 reconstructed knee fiddles, the Suka and the Fiddle from Plock. Both are crude box-like instruments with wide necks and lacking a fingerboard. One of the most successful reintroductions has been the keyed fiddle, or Nyckelharpa. This has tangents acting like frets, which can be raised or lowered with keys instead of fingering the notes directly onto the fingerboard. Held like a guitar, a short bow is wielded with the right hand, while the left hand operates the keys. Though with a history going back almost 600 years, the Nyckelharpa had almost died out in the 20th century. There were just 14 players left in the 1960s. But it was revived largely due to the efforts of Erik Sahlström. One of the best known players today is Olaf Johansson, who plays solo and with his group Varsen. It's so successful that even London has a thriving Nyckelharpa orchestra. Finland also has an interesting instrument, the recently revived johikko, a bowed lyre closely related to the kantele. It has 2 or 3 horsehair strings played with the back of the fingernail. The foremost exponent of the johikko is Rauno Nieminen. In this whirlwind tour of the centuries and the continents, we have seen a fascinating array of fiddles embedded deep in the culture of people ordinary and extraordinary, from China to Shetland, from Scandinavia to Central America. Finally, let's return to where we started, the plains of Central Asia. If you thought that over 1,000 years after inventing the bow, the Mongols would have lost interest in their instrument, the Morin Khur, take a look at this. In the heart of the Mongolian capital, Ulaanbaatar, a stunning tower block is planned, 309 meters tall, in the shape of, you guessed it, a Morin Khur.